Chapter 8 of Charles Sumner, the Scholar in Politics, by Archibald Grimké. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The conflict thickens. Defeated in the Whig State Convention of 1846, Sumner carried his cause directly to the people. Perhaps they could put an anti-slavery soul into the Whig body. Thenceforth his hammering on the anvil of public opinion was incessant. The sparks began to fly fast and far. Gloriously in earnest was the man. He glowed and flamed with an unconquerable spirit and purpose. Such tremendous ardor as was his became contagious. From mind to mind the kindling frenzy passed, until in time Massachusetts was alight and ablaze from the hills to the sea. Now, as we have seen, his fulcrum was the Mexican War. Now the lack of an anti-slavery backbone in a national statesman like Winthrop. Now it was white slavery in the Barbary States. With the strong lever of humanity he was steadily tilting to its downfall a world of pro-slavery prejudice and sympathy in the Bay State. From the platform at the bar, through the press, he was scattering burning coals, seeds of high resolves. The coals were thawing the ice from the popular heart. The seeds were to spring up in an abundant crop of anti-slavery zeal and action. Sumner expected that this rising tide of opposition to slavery would take one of two courses, either through the old Whig channel, or, if obstructed, then by a new one which it would make for itself. This expectation was not disappointed. The swelling flood sought at first to pour itself through the existing political conduit. The attempt was not successful. With accumulated strength and volume, it was ultimately thrown back upon the second way. The young anti-slavery leader, at a meeting held in Boston, September 15, 1847, for the purpose of choosing delegates to the annual Whig State Convention, in anticipation of the acquisition of new national territory at the close of the war with Mexico, tried without avail to commit the meeting to the demand that there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude therein, otherwise than for the punishment of crime. Undiscouraged by this fresh proof of the incorrigibility of the Whigs in regard to slavery, Sumner, at the head of the Whig delegation to the State Convention, made in the convention a final effort to bring the Whig party to an avowal of anti-slavery principles. The convention was hopelessly split into two hostile wings, designated in the political nomenclature of the day, Cotton Whigs and Conscience Whigs. The former, for the sake of material interests, were for pursuing the old-time policy of silence and oblivion on the slavery question, while the latter, for the sake of freedom, were for the adoption of an anti-slavery test in the selection of candidates by the next National Whig Convention for the presidency and vice presidency of the United States. A resolution was introduced recommending Webster, who was present, to try, doubtless upon the two warring wings of the convention, the spell of his imposing influence and eloquence as a candidate for the presidency. But nothing daunted, the Conscience Whigs, through John G. Palfrey, moved the following amendment to the resolution, viz., resolved that the Whigs of Massachusetts will support no men for the offices of President and Vice President, but such as are known by their acts or declared opinions to be opposed to the extension of slavery. This amendment brought on a sharp engagement between the two hostile camps of the convention. Conspicuous in this struggle on the one side were Robert C. Winthrop and John C. Gray, and on the other were Palfrey, Charles Francis Adams, and Charles Sumner. Sumner's speech in support of the amendment was startlingly bold and defiant of consequences. Alone in the company of nations, he thundered, "Our country assumes the championship of this hateful institution. Far away in the east, at the gateways of the day, by the sacred waters of the Ganges, in effeminate India, slavery is condemned. In Constantinople, queenly seat of the most powerful Mahometan empire, where barbarism still mingles with civilization, the Ottoman Sultan brands it with the stigma of disapprobation. The Barbary states of Africa are changed to abolitionists. From the untutored ruler of Morocco comes the declaration of his, stamped in the formal terms of a treaty, that the very name of slavery may perish from the minds of men. And only recently from the Bey of Tunis has proceeded that noble act by which, for the glory of God and to distinguish man from the brute creation, I quote his own words, he decreed its total abolition throughout his dominions. Let Christian America be taught by these despised Mahometans. God forbid that our republic, heir of all the ages and the foremost files of time, should adopt anew the barbarism and cruelty they have renounced or condemned. But coming directly to the point of the debate, nothing could exceed the fearlessness of his tone. On the present occasion, he said, we can only declare our course, but this should be in language sternly expressive of our determination. It would not be enough merely to put forth opinions in well-couched phrase, and add yet other resolutions to the hollow words which have passed into the limbo of things lost on earth. We must give to our opinions that edge and force which they can have only from the declared determination to abide by them at all times. We must carry them to the ballot box and bring our candidates to their standard. The recent Constitution of Louisiana, to discourage dueling, disqualifies all engaged in a duel from holding any civil office. The Whigs of Massachusetts, so far as in them lies, must pronounce a similar sentence of disqualification upon all not known to be against the extension of slavery. I urge this course at the present moment from deep conviction of its importance, and be assured, sir, whatever the final determination of this convention, there are many here today will never yield support to any candidate for president or vice presidency who is not known to be against the extension of slavery, even though he have freshly received the sacramental unction of a regular nomination. We cannot say with detestable morality, our party right or wrong. The time is gone by when gentlemen can expect to introduce among us the discipline of the camp. Loyalty to principle is higher than loyalty to party. Far above any flickering light or battle lantern of party is the everlasting sun of truth, in whose beams are the duties of men. The amendment was defeated. The cotton wing of the convention triumphed in a show of hands. Altogether too strong for the Whig bottles proved the anti-slavery wine. Sumner's early hope that his party would become the party of freedom and humanity was now wholly quenched. After this he entered no more a Whig state convention, for he saw clearly enough then that the Whigs were joined to their two masters, Webster and slavery. The cotton wing of the party in Massachusetts was devoted to the former, and he in turn was given up, body and soul, to the service of self and the dear Union. From neither was humanity able thenceforth to extract a single generous word or act. Sumner had now approached a crisis in his life. He was about to break away from a party which comprised the culture and wealth of the city and state to which he belonged. But the commanding ability of the young orator and leader had been so signally displayed during the 2 previous years in those notable orations, The True Grandeur of Nations and The Scholar, the Jurist, the Artist, the Philanthropist, as well as in other capital performances, political, academic, and popular, that even this powerful party, with Webster at its head, could not now sneer or frown him down. Sumner was already famous, and the center of a fast widening influence in Massachusetts. Such a man as he must have seemed an utter enigma to one like Webster. The moral passion and exaltation which distinguished the younger leader, the elder had long extinguished in himself. But the celestial fires which ambition had smothered in the breast of Webster, Sumner was fanning to a fierce heat on his own heart's altar. What the former refused to undertake, destiny called the latter to accomplish. Sumner's public and formal renunciation of his relations with the Whig party was made in the latter part of June, 1848, following the action of the National Convention of that party in Philadelphia during the first of the month in nominating a Southern slaveholder for the presidency. Both of the old parties, through their national conventions this year, demonstrated their utter worthlessness as anti-slavery instruments. Nothing in that regard could be expected from the Democratic organization, since in deference to the South it placed in nomination for the presidency a Northern man who had recounted his free State opinions on the Wilmot Proviso. Lewis Cass, if not exactly a Northern man with Southern principles, was at least a Northern man under Southern influences, and therefore, according to Sumner's well-known political test, was not fit to represent the free States in the national government, much less to be chosen by their votes as the head of that government. But the Whigs, in their selection of General Taylor, showed an even more shameless subserviency to Southern influences. This action advertised the friends of freedom that thenceforth they need expect no anti-slavery performance from that party, which was the signal for secession of the more determined of its anti-slavery membership, and the starting of a new movement devoted to uncompromising opposition to the farther spread of slavery in the Union. 2 Massachusetts delegates to the National Convention raised boldly in that body the standard of revolt. Charles Allen and Henry Wilson, upon the nomination of General Taylor, declared their refusal to support him as a candidate for the presidency. And so the great Whig bolt of 44 years ago was inaugurated before the adjournment of the convention. The reception of the news of the nomination in Massachusetts verified the threatening prediction of Sumner, made the previous autumn to the Whig State Convention, that there are many here today who will never yield support to any candidate for presidency or vice presidency who is not known to be against the extension of slavery, even though he have freshly received the sacramental unction of a regular nomination. Nothing was now left to such people, Sumner among them, who desired to operate politically against the national evil, but to proceed to the organization of a new party to that end. The state of the North on the slavery question indicated plainly enough that the time was ripe for organized resistance to the extension and to the increasing pretensions of the peculiar institution of the South. This was particularly true of Massachusetts, where, after the Whig fiasco, a call was promptly issued for a convention to found a new party of freedom. The convention met in Worcester, June 28, 1848. There was no hall in the city large enough to accommodate the excited and enthusiastic multitude who had, in response to the call, assembled from all parts of the state to the number of about 5,000 souls on fire with hatred of slavery. It was on the Common, in the open air, that the founding of the Free Soil Party in Massachusetts proceeded that memorable June day. The speeches of Samuel Hoar, who was made president of the permanent organization of the Mass Convention, of Henry Wilson, Charles Allen, Joshua Leavitt, Joshua R. Giddings, J.C. Lovejoy, Charles Francis Adams, of Sumner, and others rose, in the determined manhood of them, to the level of the emergency. Old party ties were then and there renounced by each of the speakers, and by none more distinctly and forcibly than by Charles Sumner, who beyond all the others embodied in himself the stern spirit and purpose of the anti-slavery revolution, spreading through the free states and manifesting itself in independent political action. A party which renounces its sentiments, he said firmly, must expect to be renounced. In the coming contest I wish it understood that I belong to the party of freedom, to that party which plants itself on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. He was one of the first to perceive the necessity of a freedom power to match and master the slave power. The lovers of freedom, said he at this time, from both parties, and irrespective of all party associations, must unite, and by new combination congenial to the Constitution, oppose both candidates. This will be the freedom power, whose single object will be to resist the slave power. We will put them face to face and let them grapple. Who can doubt the result? He refused to choose between two evils. He had no choice when such were presented to him. He must needs reject both. Both Cass and Taylor were evils, and as such he rejected them. He admitted, however, that there are occasions of political difference when it may become expedient to vote for a candidate who does not completely represent our sentiments. There are matters legitimately within the range of expediency and compromise. The tariff and the currency are of this character. If a candidate differs from me on these more or less, I may yet vote for him. But the question before the country is of another character. This will not admit of compromise. It is not within the domain of expediency. To be wrong on this is to be wholly wrong. Replying to the taunt that to vote for a third-party candidate was to throw away votes and to fail, he exclaimed in words which must long have burned in the hearts of his hearers, "Fail, sir? No honest, earnest effort in a good cause can fail. It may not be crowned with the applause of man, it may not seem to touch the goal of immediate worldly success, which is the end and aim of so much of life, but it is not lost. It helps to strengthen the weak with new virtue, to arm the irresolute with proper energy, to animate all with devotion to duty, which in the end conquers all. Fail? Did the martyrs fail, when with precious blood they sowed the seed of the church? Did the discomfited champions of freedom fail, who have left those names in history that can never die? Did the 300 Spartans fail, when in the narrow pass they did not fear to brave the innumerable Persian hosts, whose very arrows darkened the sun? Overborne by numbers crushed to earth, they left an example greater far than any victory, and this is the least we can do. Our example will be the mainspring of triumph hereafter. It will not be the first time in history that the hosts of slavery have outnumbered the champions of freedom, but where is it written that slavery finally prevailed? At the close of the mass convention at Worcester, the new political movement may be said to have been fully launched upon the tide of public opinion in Massachusetts. That it had come to stay, all the auguries of the times were loudly prophesying and proclaiming. That it would finally prevail seemed to a soul like Sumner a foregone conclusion. His confidence on that day in regard to the immediate results it was destined to produce, subsequent events amply justified. "It will sweep the heartstrings of the people," he declared. "It will smite all the chords with a might to draw forth emotions such as no political struggle ever awakened before." On the 9th of August, following the great anti-slavery demonstration at Worcester, a convention of the free states held at Buffalo nominated for the presidency and the vice presidency, respectively, on a free soil platform, Martin Van Buren of New York and Charles Francis Adams of Massachusetts. "We inscribe on our banners," so ran a resolve of the Buffalo Convention, "free soil, free speech, free labor, and free men. And under it we'll fight on and fight ever until a triumphant victory shall reward our exertions." Those words struck all the chords in the breasts of thousands at the North, became the watchword of the stirring campaign inaugurated by the new party of freedom upon the adjournment of the convention. The political antecedents of the Buffalo nominees betokened, as nothing else could, the wide trend which the new movement was taking. Van Buren had been the foremost and most powerful of the veteran chieftains of the Democratic party, and Adams was one of the most influential and able of the younger leaders of the Massachusetts Whigs. It is well known that Webster himself hesitated for a while, with divided mind, between the new party of freedom and the old Whig organization, with Zachary Taylor at its head. Like Van Buren, in respect of the Democratic nomination, he had set his soul on the Whig nomination. They were both, in the obedience to the Southern wings of their respective parties, pushed from their stools, and others, more satisfactory to the slave power, seated in their places. Disappointed ambition and a thirst for revenge hurried Van Buren into actual revolt, and drove Webster nearly to the same length in opposition to the candidacy of General Taylor. The supreme and calculating selfishness of the latter, however, conquered finally the fierce passion for revenge, and saved him for 4 sorry years to the service of the Whigs and their imperious master, the slave despotism of the nation. If Webster, mutinous because of his personal defeat, stood irresolute during a few sullen weeks between the camp of the new movement and that of the Whigs, there were thousands of his old friends and followers mutinous because of the defeat of liberty, who betrayed no irresolution, but ranged themselves promptly under the banner flung to the breeze by the Free Soil party, as the great meeting in Faneuil Hall on August 22 called to ratify the nominations of the Buffalo Convention grandly attested. Over this meeting Charles Sumner was fitly chosen to preside. To him, Webster failing them, the hopes of anti-slavery Massachusetts turned for leadership as to no other man in the mighty political struggle with the slave power then impending. Against a combination, resolute and uncompromising, the moral instincts of Massachusetts were reaching out toward a champion not less determined and unyielding. Sumner's opening speech at the ratification meeting furnished additional proof, if indeed such were needed, that if the hour of the irrepressible conflict in the Bay State had struck, God had provided the man for the crisis. There was a moral force and momentum of purpose of the right about him, which rendered him singular, preeminent, and among the political opponents of slavery, not alone in Massachusetts, but throughout the free states. Whatever he did, wherever he appeared, whenever he spoke, whether directly on the subject of slavery or on some other topic, he gave more and more now an impression as of a man possessed, burning up with the fires of one supreme idea. There now began run through all his political utterances a sameness of thought, a repetition of argument and historical reference and illustration, an impressive and almost imposing uniformity of passion and power. All his knowledge of universal history, all his vast readings in the world of letters, all his immense acquisitions as a jurist, seemed now but so many splendid tributaries to feed and serve this one idea, to raise the strong current of his love and devotion to the level of its utmost demands. By the side of this one idea, all other questions sank from his view. He recognized but one question before the country, calling for settlement, and that was his cause, the cause of humanity. No longer, said he, with characteristic phraseology and confidence, will banks and tariffs occupy the foremost place, and sounding always with the chink of dollars and cents, give their tone to the policy of the country. Henceforward, protection to man will be the true American system. It is his glory that more than any other political leader of the times he endeavored to make this noble prophecy reality in the life of the North. And though the actual results fell short, wretchedly short of the splendid expectation, yet it cannot be doubted that there did pass a novel virtue, a moral force, into the politics of the free states, which wrought mightily ever afterward for the protection of man in America. In the campaign which the Faneuil Hall ratification meeting inaugurated in Massachusetts, Sumner rendered signal service to the new party on the stump, addressing large audiences all over the state, from the sea to the hills. But this was not the sum of his contributions to the Free Soil movement during this first year of its appearance as a national organization. His pen was as busy as was his tongue in its behalf. He accepted, besides the Free Soil nomination for Congress from the Boston district, the men who nominated knew, and he knew, that he would not be elected, but the time had come when it was the duty of the friends of freedom to stand together at the ballot box and to make a show of hands for the sake of their principles. Union now was the watchword, and self-sacrifice and labor. It was peculiarly Sumner's, and hence he cheerfully took the post assigned him in the contest, notwithstanding his early and strong disinclination to enter upon a political career. It has been my desire and determination, he wrote the committee which informed him of his nomination, to labor in such fields of usefulness as are open to every private citizen without the honor, emolument, or constraint of office. I would show by example, might I so aspire, that something may be done for the welfare of our race without the support of public station or the accident of popular favor. In this course I hope to persevere. Happily for mankind, this lofty aspiration of the young scholar was not down in the book of destiny. For him the fates had quite other plans, with the execution of which, all unconscious to himself, they were at the moment busily engaged. The estimation in which Sumner was held at this time in Massachusetts may be gathered from words of a man of so much mental sang-froid as was Charles Francis Adams, uttered by him on the occasion of the last rally for freedom in Faneuil Hall on the night of November 9th, and in Mr. Sumner's absence from the meeting. Said Mr. Adams, "Charles Sumner is a man of large heart, not of that class of politicians who calculate availability and the numbers of the opposition, but a man who takes an enlarged view of a noble system of action and places his shoulder to the wheel to move it forward. He is now doing more to impress on the country a new and powerful moral sentiment in connection with the movement than any man or any other 10 men in the country." That certainly sounds like enthusiastic praise, and it may be extravagant praise, but this much it is safe to assert, that the reform in Massachusetts had found in a young jurist of 37 its preeminent representative. Subsequent events proved that there were others in the country who equaled him in intellectual force, and in some particular lines of political leadership excelled him, as did S.P. Chase in practical statesmanship, and W.H. Seward and Henry Wilson in party management, but in moral oneness of purpose and momentum of character he was unrivaled. And at this juncture of the conflict between freedom and slavery in the Republic, those were the qualities above all others which freedom required her champions to possess. In sheer weight of intellect, Webster had no peer in the public life of the land, but lacking the moral qualities which distinguished Sumner, the godlike Daniel was thrust from his throne that another might mount it. Sumner's feet, without his knowing it, were already upon the steps of Webster's throne in Massachusetts. Another capital qualification of Sumner for leadership at this crisis was the clearness with which he apprehended the difference between political opposition to slavery and the moral agitation against it, which looked to general and immediate emancipation as a direct end. He well knew that a political party in America could not address itself successfully to such an end, for the political power of the Union could not reach slavery within the States. Party action had necessarily to proceed along constitutional lines in order to acquire and retain the confidence and support of the people. Slavery was local and drew its life from municipal institutions. In the absence of positive law creating the evil, it had no standing in the national forum. To his scholar's ear, the history of the country sounded but one note, the note of freedom. To his jurist's eye, the Constitution, on no page and in no line, sanctioned the holding of property in men. Freedom was national, slavery was sectional. He opposed slavery, therefore, wherever the nation was responsible for it, whether in the District of Columbia or in the national territories or on the high seas under the national colors. Here he stopped, wisely circumscribing his political aims and duties by his political responsibilities. His aim as a political reformer was, in fine, to place the national government openly, actively, and perpetually on the side of freedom. The months from the formation of the Free Soil Party to the meeting of Congress in December 1849 were months of steadily increasing excitement on the subject of slavery. The slave power had repeatedly failed to open the national territories to slave immigration. Over Oregon in 1848 there had occurred in Congress fierce preliminary trial of strength between the sections. The South was thrown in the struggle, and the anti-slavery principles of the Ordinance of 1787 were applied to the territory. Defeated at this point, the slave states threw themselves with determined purpose upon California and New Mexico in order to effect an opening into them for the peculiar institution, and thereby to preserve the political balance of the federal system in its favor. But to every such attempt the North opposed a resolute front and wall of resistance to the farther extension of slavery under the Constitution. Nevertheless, Calhoun and the South clung to the pretension of the self-extension of the evil under that instrument. Baffled and at bay, they directly set up the cry that the stronger section was oppressing the weaker, unjustly depriving it of its constitutional rights and equality in the Union. Disunion sentiments were flagrantly professed and passionately preached from this time at the South. The controversy invaded religious bodies, and churches resounded with the clash and clangor of conflicting moral and social ideas and interests, and began to part asunder along sectional lines. The application of California for admission into the Union as a free state unloosed the winds and gave to the rising tempest its tongue of thunder. In the lurid glare of the crisis, it was presently discovered that Calhoun, about to die, had paused, with the South at his back, on the brink of disunion. Then, terror-stricken for the fate of their dear Union, Northern Whigs and Northern Democrats lifted again on deck the old pilot of compromise. Webster, with one eye on the Union and the other on the presidency, drew down the proud colors of liberty from his dishonored old Ironsides and drifted away in the wake of the slave power. On March 7, 1850, the great New Englander and eulogist of the Pilgrim Fathers flung the whole weight of his powerful voice and influence in the scales against the slave. California was admitted as a free state, but the Fugitive Slave Bill was enacted into law, and again was Webster's glorious Union saved at heavy cost to humanity. From the passage of that wicked law, the anti-slavery tide in Massachusetts rose rapidly to its flood. The overthrow of Webster, Winthrop, and the Whigs followed swiftly in its course. After Sumner, although a United States commissioner, denounced the infamous act from the platform of Faneuil Hall in a speech of extraordinary boldness and energy, announcing his resolute purpose to refuse his official aid to its execution in the memorable sentence, "I cannot forget that I am a man, although I am a commissioner," Massachusetts was not long in seeing that she had found Webster's successor. Webster's political crown and leadership were in truth then and there transferred to the brow of Sumner. The reader must have a passage or two from this speech, which was said to have made Mr. Sumner senator. The soul sickens. He is denouncing the fugitive slave law. In the contemplation of this legalized outrage, in the dreary annals of the past, there are many acts of shame. There are ordinances of monarchs and laws which have become a byword and a hissing to the nations. But when we consider the country and the age, I ask fearlessly, what act of shame, what ordinance of monarch, what law can compare in atrocity with this enactment of an American Congress? I do not forget Appius Claudius, tyrant decemvir of ancient Rome, condemning Virginia as a slave, nor Louis XIV of France letting slip the dogs of religious persecution by the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, nor Charles I of England arousing the patriot rage of Hampden by the extortion of ship money, nor the British Parliament provoking in our country spirits kindred to Hampden by the tyranny of the Stamp Act and tea tax. I would not exaggerate. I wish to keep within bounds, but I think there can be little doubt that the condemnation now affixed to all these transactions and to their authors must be the lot hereafter of the Fugitive Slave Bill, and of every one according to the measure of his influence who gave it his support. Into the immortal catalogue of national crimes it has now passed, drawing by inexorable necessity its authors also, and chiefly him who, as President of the United States, set his name to the bill and breathed into it that final breath without which it would bear no life. Other presidents may be forgotten, but the name signed to the Fugitive Slave Bill can never be forgotten. There are depths of infamy as there are heights of fame. I regret to say what I must, but truth compels me. Better for him had he never been born. Better for his memory and for the good name of his children had he never been president. So much for the Black Bill and its authors. Here is another passage like unto it. Elsewhere he may pursue his human prey. The orator is now fulminating against the slave hunter, employ his congenial bloodhounds, and exult in his successful game. But into Massachusetts he must not come. Again let me be understood. I counsel no violence. I would not touch his person, not with whips and thongs would I scourge him from the land. The contempt, the indignation, the abhorrence of the community shall be our weapons of offense. Wherever he moves, he shall find no house to receive him, no table spread to nourish him, nor welcome to cheer him. The dismal lot of the Roman exile shall be his. He shall be a wanderer without roof, fire, or water. Men shall point at him in the streets and on the highways. Villages, towns, and cities shall refuse to receive the monster. They shall vomit him forth, never again to disturb the repose of our community. To the imbecile boast that the compromise measures of 1850 had settled the slavery question, he replied thus: "Yes, settled, settled. That is the word. Nothing, sir, can be settled which is not right." Warning the friends of freedom against lightly reposing confidence in weak and irresolute men, he gave them as a guide to conduct his famous recipe, which runs as follows: 3 things at least they must require. The first is backbone, the second is backbone, and the third is backbone. This speech was made November 6, 1850, just before the annual elections in Massachusetts, which comprised that year state officers, members of Congress, and members of both branches of the legislature. The multiplicity of political combinations which arose in the state at this time for the purpose of influencing the elections indicated a general breaking up of the old parties in Massachusetts and a general growth of the new organization. There were combinations in at least 2 of the congressional districts between Whigs and Free Soilers, while combinations prevailed generally in the senatorial districts between Democrats and Free Soilers. Indeed, there was a close alliance of these 2 parties during the campaign, the bargain being between the parties of the first and of the second parts of this coalition that the Democrats should have the state officers and the Free Soilers the United States senator for the long term, to be chosen to the vacancy made by Mr. Webster's resignation creation of the office for the Secretaryship of State in Millard Fillmore's cabinet. The Democratic and Free Soil coalition triumphed in the elections, and in due time it proceeded to the division of the various offices in accordance with the anti-election understanding between the parties. Owing to the majority principle which was at that time incorporated in the Constitution of the State, and the failure of some of the candidates for State offices to receive a majority of the votes, their election was thrown into the legislature, which was controlled by the Democrats and the Free Soilers. The former were awarded the governor, lieutenant governor, 5 of the 9 councilors, the treasurer, and the senator for the short term. The latter got the senator for the long term. The choice of the Free Soilers in the legislature and the State at large, and in fact throughout the North, fell with singular unanimity upon Sumner as an almost ideal representative of Free Soil principles. To the Democrats in the legislature and in the State at large, he was possibly the least objectionable candidate with Whig antecedents who could have been presented for their suffrages on the senatorship subject. Sumner had never been a Whig partisan, had not identified himself actively with distinctively Whig principles and policies, such as were embraced in the tariff and the bank questions. The Democratic Legislative Caucus accepted him as the candidate of that party, and thereupon he became the joint candidate for the United States senatorship of the Free Soil and the Democratic members of the legislature. In pursuance of the arrangement between the parties to the coalition, the legislature elected George S. Boutwell and Henry W. Cushman, Democrats, governor and lieutenant governor, respectively, and subsequently Robert Rantoul, Jr., another Democrat senator for the short term, expiring March 4, 1851. The balloting for senator for the long term was protracted and exciting, lasting from January 14 to April 24, 1851. When Mr. Sumner was chosen by a majority of 1 on the 26th ballot in a total vote in the House of 384, the Senate on its part having elected him 3 months before to the same office. Robert C. Winthrop was from beginning to end the candidate of the Whigs for Webster's seat, and was therefore, as far as numbers go, Sumner's principal opponent before the legislature for the long senatorial term. Throughout the long contest in the legislature, Sumner observed strictly, deviated not the breadth of a hair from the rule of non-intervention, which he prescribed to himself touching his candidacy. No man ever accepted office, justly remarked the Daily Commonwealth on the morning after his election, with cleaner hands than Charles Sumner. He consented to receive the nomination with extreme reluctance. After he was nominated, and an onslaught unprecedented for ferocity and recklessness in political warfare had seemed to render his election impossible, unless he would authorize some qualification of the alleged obnoxious doctrines of his speeches, particularly of his last Faneuil Hall speech. Mr. Sumner refused to retract, qualify, or explain 10 lines from his pen, lines that a politician might have written without even the appearance of a change of sentiment, would have secured his election in January. No solicitation of friends or opponents could extort a line. A delegation of Hunkers applied to him for a few words to cover their retreat. In reply, he stated that he had no pledge to give, no explanations to make. He referred them to his published speeches for his position, and added that he had not sought the office, but if it came to him, it must find him an independent man. To another Democrat who called on him on the same errand, he said, "If by walking across my office I could secure the senatorship, I would not take a step." In February he placed in the hands of General Wilson a letter authorizing that gentleman to withdraw his name whenever, in his judgment, the good of the cause should require it. "In this matter, I pray you," so ran the letter to Henry Wilson above referred to, "do not think of me. I have no political prospects which I desire to nurse. There is nothing in the political field which I covet. Abandon me, then, whenever you think best, without notice or apology. The cause is everything. I am nothing." So straight, morally, did the Free Soil candidate stand that he leaned backward. Surely he possessed to a singular degree the 3 requisites of a representative of freedom, demanded by himself: backbone, backbone, backbone. He was distinctly and emphatically of the vertebrated breed of men, averse to doing anything while the contest lasted to influence the vote of the legislature in his favor. Sumner, after it was decided, was not less averse to having any demonstration made in connection with his election which might give it the air of a personal triumph. It was not his triumph, but the cause's. The cause was to be magnified under the circumstances, not any man. The cause was everything, the individual nothing. Hence he discountenanced a projected public demonstration at his own house on the evening of his election. His heart, said he, dictated silence, and no wonder, for his election was an event of the first magnitude in the politics of the times. It put upon him responsibilities which Atlantean shoulders could alone bear up under. Therefore, that evening he absented himself from Boston, betaking himself to Cambridge and the home of his friend Henry W. Longfellow, where he passed the night. There were joyful demonstrations of the friends of freedom in Boston that night, notwithstanding the flight of the victor beyond earshot of the paeans and the plaudits of his friends and followers. There was rejoicing of the friends of freedom throughout the North because of this far-reaching achievement, which indeed cheered the hearts of good men and true across the Atlantic as well. Congratulations poured upon him from every quarter, thick and fast. S.P. Chase wrote, Laus Deo, from the bottom of my heart I congratulate you, no, not you, but all friends of freedom everywhere, upon your election to the Senate. Joshua R. Giddings wrote from Ohio, a most intense interest was felt in this whole region, and I have seen no event which has given greater joy to the population generally. Elihu Burritt wrote from England, my soul is gladdened to a great and exceeding joy at the news of your election to fill the place of Daniel Webster. It has been hailed by the friends of human freedom and progress in this country with exultation. There are more eyes and hearts fixed upon your course than upon that of any man in America. John G. Whittier wrote, I rejoice that unpledged, free, and without a single concession or compromise, thou art enabled to take thy place in the Senate. I never knew such a general feeling of real heart pleasure and satisfaction as is manifested by all except inveterate hunkers in view of thy election. The whole country is electrified by it. Sick abed, I heard the guns, Quaker as I am, with real satisfaction. At the time of his election to the Senate, Charles Sumner had just turned 40. He was in the meridian of the intellectual life and in the fullness of manly vigor and beauty. The splendid position he had reached by sheer worth, unrivaled services. Not before nor since, we venture to assert, has public office been so utterly unsolicited. He turned not a finger, scorned to budge an inch, would not write a line to obtain the grand prize. It went to him by the laws of gravitation and character, to him the clean of hand and pure of soul. It was the hour finding the man. End of section 8.